Wow.
Just give me 1 second.
Everybody behave yourself. All right. So the agenda that we had put forward looks a lot like this. I'm actually going to make a new thinking in any notes that we've got. Unless you guys want to work off the one we were just on.
Yeah, the one before was fine. Just work from that.
All right.
Agreed.
Okay. There's a nice link. All right. Let's cut and paste across the virtual machine board. The first agenda was item on the agenda was welcome and updates on the Crowbar migration.
So we're talking here specifically about the progress being made in moving out of the crowbar.org to the OpenCrowbar.org repository and any product or deliverable that might come from that, correct? Why don't we just document that?
Let's not talk about the products. Let's just talk specifically about moving the work on the Crowbar 2 based workload and the Crowbar 2 itself from the Crowbar org to OpenCrowbar org. And what are the requirements to get there, and where we stand right now.
Now I'm completely confused.
Well, I can jump in. I know Rob re-imported the Crowbar core repository into the OpenCrowbar org. Little history here. We hit a fairly obscure issue with GitHub. I don't know if everybody was familiar with it, but the import into the new organization on GitHub under OpenCrowbar was a fork of Barclamp Crowbar. So it showed all the history and it showed the link back to the original Barclamp. The problem we ran into is if somebody tried to fork that new repository, GitHub viewed it as a fork of Barclamp Crowbar. So if you had the existing Barclamp Crowbar from the original Crowbar repository or Crowbar organization, then GitHub would not fork it. It would actually just kind of take you to the page that was your Barclamp Crowbar. And that was causing problems. So we ended up deleting that repo and re-importing it without that fork link back on the GitHub side. So it's now possible to fork both repos in a single GitHub account. This was a quirk. This is a quirk of the way GitHub tracks forks back on the GitHub side. It wasn't a naming conflict or anything like that. It has to do with the way GitHub tracked their network. So that's now completed. I actually have to reclone that, but
well, I don't think it's a GitHub issue per se, so much as the way that Git works.
Well, it's not Git. right? It's not a Git issue per se. It's the way GitHub tracked the fork on their side. So the issue was if you went to GitHub, if you wanted to fork the repository into your local account on GitHub, when you tried to fork it, GitHub knew that that repository is a fork of the original bar clamp crowbar, and it refused to fork it again if you already had a bar clamp crowbar, which made it impossible to work on the two repositories simultaneously. There was a way around that using basic Git magic. You could clone it locally and then push it to GitHub. But when you did that, GitHub didn't recognize it as a fork, which meant you couldn't submit pull requests. So that process broke. So that one's resolved, but I figured I'd throw some insight into what was going on behind the scenes because it seemed like a lot of juggling, but it was just funny.
So, Mike, have you documented somewhere the actual commands that you executed to fix this?
I sent Rob and I think the rest of the architects an email on what I had done, and I'm not sure what Rob actually did eventually, but I think he did the same process I did. The gist of the process, it's actually very simple. At the Git level, the repository that was on GitHub, the OpenCrowbar repository, you clone it and make a local copy. So you literally clone the repository locally, but you don't do a checkout. You do a bare repository clone. You then create a repository on GitHub, an empty repository, and you then push it up in mirror mode. And once you've done that, you have the repository on GitHub, but effectively you do the fork by cloning it locally and then pushing it to GitHub instead of doing the fork on GitHub itself. That's effectively what you do.
Mm-hmm.
So that happened, and so far I believe that repository is in good shape. Rob's been working on the BDD tests in there to get them all passing, but generally the code's in good shape. It does substantially work. I mean, obviously there may be bugs. I haven't found anything showstopper, and I've kind of been working out of that repository. Most of the changes I've done are in the area of the documentation system. I haven't done any kind of core crowbar changes except in the doc area.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, how do you do the build of the RPMs for testing?
I'm not doing builds at all. I'm not doing builds. Okay. I'm running directly from the source tree until we figure out how we're going to do builds.
Yeah, I too am just running straight. I'm using dev test, running straight out of the source tree, as most developers would expect to do it.
So I've done the RPM packaging for the OpenCrowbar.org tree, and I've just given the scripts to JT so that he can implement them into his Jenkins system and utilize the same methodology for any build tools that might emerge out of that.
Are those build scripts checked into the repository somewhere?
Negative. And I consider them not in a condition for check-in. JT is the one who's going to massage those and incorporate them into Jenkins so that we are building packages and people can test the packages. And when he is done, that will be checked in. If it is the common wisdom of the group here that even though it's in rough form, it should be checked in, I can do that immediately. I haven't heard anything, so I'll leave it as is.
I would encourage to share early and often.
Is that the common wisdom of the team here?
I don't know if it's the common wisdom of the team, but it's generally a really good practice. It's easier for me. I'd love to lay an eye on it. I don't know if I want to really collaborate all that much, but I definitely want to see what you're doing. And so if you drop it in GitHub, it'll be a lot easier. You know.
Having it in GitHub is not a problem, but I don't want people use it unless it's usable.
What? Well, we're our GitHub's a development tool. You know, it's for developers to share and collaborate. It's not a release mechanism. So yeah, there's going to be broken stuff all the time, and we're going to do our best to make sure that it's working. And if it works, we can tag it. That it's the revision that works gets tagged.
So there are two categories of users of the repository. There is a core Crowbar work, and that includes the development tools and everything else. And then there is the workload work on the OpenStack and Hadoop. It is perfectly fine for the first category of people to work around the deficiencies on the tool set. There is no need for the workload people to work on that until the tools are ready for them to do the work, because they'll be spending a lot more time fixing the tools than doing their work on the workloads.
Right. So the policy still stands that we do not have our whole build infrastructure in place, and that you can run Crowbar directly out of the source tree. So it should not interfere with them at all. But development has to happen in public. So otherwise, I mean, what do you mean by works? You know, what is usable?
We can work on the workloads on the bar clamps for the OpenStack and for Hadoop currently out of the Crowbar org. The current build tools at least work. We can build the ISO, and we can do all of the current ways we do the testing of our current code, including the simulator of the Crowbar 2. Now, without having the ability to deliver something which we can pass to the QA organization for them to test the thing, we can't deliver anything to QA to do the testing.
Right. I'm not saying to put the scripts that are building RPMs for the Open Crowbar repository in the old Crowbar repository. They have nothing to do with each other.
Yep, I agreed.
Basically, I was encouraging Uncle to put them in the Open Crowbar repository so we could all collaborate on them and begin building and giving developers and people who want to create a product out of this the tools, or at least the beginnings of the tools, and that they can collaborate on to help us work together.
I'm trying to understand what collaborate means in that sense. We can all collaborate on working on the tools to do the develop the RPM packaging and package the various the pieces together.
I want to see what Uncle's done so far in building scripts to build RPM, and all he's done is emailed it to someone else. That's not, and I do not want to make a negative example out of John Terpstra because he's generally amazingly wonderful. I'd really love to be able to set eyes on it, and the general idea is that we share as much as possible all the time, and that things that we bless as working, we tag. That's normally how it goes. You create a branch,
fine.
Work on a branch. That's all I was encouraging to do.
Got it.
In terms of a released product and what works, what doesn't work, what we're concerned about is for developing bar clamps and stuff. That's still down the road. That's not the subject of this. This subject is the Open Crowbar migration. So Rob dropped a lot of really good bullet points into the Open Crowbar backlog thinking. does anybody want to address anything specifically in there? Okay. I'd really like to point out what's online.
Okay, if you have. Sorry, if you have a look at the build tools, you'll see the stuff that I've got done pushed up there.
Thanks, John. The primary concern to me is actually what's on line 12 right now, which is community governance that encourages collaboration and exposes value that's being created and enables contribution. That's why I asked John to share that code, why everything that I do gets pushed to GitHub, even if it's, I write, warnings, this will do this, but it doesn't do that yet. And I've tested it here, but, your mileage may vary. And contact me for help. I'd like to get to a point over the next 3 to 6 months where we actually have real community governance, where we have an elected and voting body that has control over check-ins, releases, to make this a real project and not something that seems opaque and willy-nilly, as it seems for the past 2 years it's been. We've been taking that can down the road of creating a real community for a long time. And it's really got to change. Otherwise, this is just going to remain a mere shim of open source collaboration and not a real product that will have legs like our competitors. I'm going to pick that up and try to move forward with it in the coming 3 to 6 months. Because that's critical it's a huge opportunity with creating a new organization and having nice clean repos and less, and eliminating as much as possible the baggage that we carry for us to be able to establish community and proper governance.
Yeah, sorry I'm dropping type in here and acting like I go to the machine.
What was that, Rob?
Yeah,
sorry.
We
got a lot of noise.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The reason why I haven't been talking is I'm in a noisy spot. So, what I think we need to do, and I believe, Arkady, you're doing this, is trying to figure out what things need to be done in order to have, make the OpenCrowbar repos usable for the different communities that we need to serve, right? The first is getting developers in there. The next is being able to have QA teams pulling the code and testing the code, right? Then actually being able to spin up demos and pilots and things like that out of it. I think that it's very easy to not know what we're doing if we haven't written down the objectives, right? That was part of why we did the rationalization email, high-level objectives. We need to decompose that. That's why I was typing in the background, is trying to figure out, all right, what concrete things need to get done so that we can say, all right, we did these things, start moving people over. Because I don't want to create a moving target with that. So I also don't want to add things that would be nice to have, but we don't actually need, right? Developers could come in without a gated pull system. We don't want that, but it's not a block. It is a problem when we get to a QA state, I would say, to not have a gated pull. So let's break these things into milestones, get people prioritized on those, and then working through. That's why we needed to have this kickoff call to restart this effort, right? We need to coordinate this with the community. We need to be very clear in how we discuss it. And I'll add, if that's actually the subject for next Wednesday's meeting, then let's make the primary subject for next Wednesday's meeting because it's supposed to be a design meeting, and we'll do that. But it's clearly a big topic. It's going to take some time to speak to this.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to make that the topic for the next design meeting, because although we have some design work, I think kind of getting over the hump and making the OpenCrowbar repo ready for developers is probably a higher priority right now.
Agree.
Well, I can share this as well. I'm going to switch it to sharing my full desktop, which is also the Crowbar 2014. We're going to use this for the subject of design meetings. I had a question of what folks think a governance body would look like to manage the community. I'm familiar with how Apache run things, and we have quite a bit of experience with how OpenStack is running things. And the scope of the OpenStack organization is much, much broader than the Crowbar product. So I look to organizations such as Mozilla.org, the Apache pick a project from the Apache Foundation, or something as simple as the folks who developed the Mutt email utility, and see how their organizations are managed. If folks are interested in that, I'm going to be following up with this. I've written a bunch of stuff about it last year, but we didn't get much traction on it. But I'd like to try to really make that happen this year, because I think Crowbar can be so incredibly useful to a wide variety of folks, especially with the design of OpenCrowbar, that we need to be prepared to get people active in the community, because there's going to be a lot of interest. You know, I can get on the Food Fight show and go over the design and what we've got with OpenCrowbar and get a whole lot of interest in our project all of a sudden. But unless we have a governance body and really active community participation, it's just going to fall flat and will continue to look like just a veneer of open source and not really, and like making Dell look good and not really an open source project. So that's what, in terms of community, I'm committing to for the next 3 to 6 months to make it happen. As our OpenCrowbar migration from building and developing in the Crowbar organization to the OpenCrowbar organization goes forward. I'm really excited about the opportunities and the potential there.
Sorry, Jed, you mentioned that when you presented stuff, the Crowbar 2 idea to various organizations, there was great interest. Can you kind of give some input on what those organizations and what specific features or functionality piqued their interest?
Yeah, at, for example, at the Ops Code Summit, the Chef Summit, I had 3 major infrastructure as a service organizations, some open source, others closed source, say we need a deployment tool and we need an orchestration tool that works on bare metal. We need a bare metal story and we need an orchestration story. And you guys have one and we don't, and we'd love to be able to fit our product into your product. And we'd love to be able to help with Crowbar. How do we get started? And all I could say was, like, find me on IRC, you know, and join the community calls. But, you know, people are very busy with their own projects. So when there's a governing body and people dedicated to really to continue these relationships, then the project can move forward. Then the project will get a lot of. So there were 3 major infrastructures as a service. And then there were some big player Dell customers who wanted these features and had and are very involved in the Chef community and have the DevOps kind of people who can collaborate on this project. But again, they're just like, yeah, it looks like Dell's just developing it and throwing it over the wall and forgetting about the community. We don't want to be involved with that. We need an organization that is committed to not just reaching out, but maintaining a relationship and encouraging participation. You know,
okay.
We're not so sexy that people just come. It needs to be nurtured. You know, if you look at how the OpenStack is this huge organization with so many projects, but there's consistent follow-up. There's always review emails. There's always every week there's status emails. Same thing with Chef. Same thing with Puppet. Same thing with any of these successful projects. Even, you know, I get every month I get a status email from this PHP-based email system that I used 10 years ago, you know, and the guy is still hacking on it. And every month he's like, these are the fixes that I made this month. It makes it really easy to jump back in. And we haven't been doing that. You know, we've been wrangling with other large organizations like SUSE to maintain that relationship, but that's not actually community building. That's just who's going to do what and tit for tat and your release cycle and our release cycle. It's not actually building a community. So I'm super excited to be able to help out with this and would like to, over the course, like by the end of March, to have a mission statement and the proper bylaws and everything in place to be able to say this is how our community is run. And this source code is Apache licensed source code, which is available to all. We are taking, this organization is taking responsibility for it. That is, this ad hoc organization of people are taking responsibility for it, and we are making decisions about it. And just not, anybody can submit a pull request, but the people who are accepting pull requests are a small to medium-sized group of people who are actually responsible for it.
Okay. Now, I fully agree that the current structure where there is no person really responsible and in charge and not having the full process and the governing body established, as well as not well-defined processes and infrastructure to support the open source, the open source development activities are, severe hampering steps.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, Judd, I think just getting these meetings back on a regular schedule will help. If there's an agenda and there are minutes from the meetings, I think we'll see from a practical point of view, it's kind of hard for an outsider to join the community right now because there's been so much change and Dell has been driving a lot of that change. We've had input from other people, but we've kind of been taking the lead. I think now's a good time to begin just having regular meetings, making sure people know what we're doing, letting people contribute. And the new doc system, the new repos, really make a difference in making the project more approachable. The old organization with the old code structure with DevTool and the way we were handling multiple repos it's a steep learning curve. It's just weird. So I think you're going in the right direction, and I think we'll do fine going forward here if we start having regular meetings and just let people know what we're working on.
Mm-hmm.
I would add there was a proposal that was floated, I think, back in September to begin a more consistent, maybe it was October, a very consistent predictive. These are stories that are going in. The pull requests for stories that we've discussed in the community are going to be prioritized over pull requests that weren't. We need to codify that, and then start implementing. That sort of got shot down because the old Crowbar stuff didn't have the infrastructure we needed to implement that plan. I think we have a chance to actually fix that. Can we start a process in this? Probably in process meetings, which is this week. Start then in 2 weeks, talking about what governance controls we want, how we want things to be put together. Write it down and then.
Do a series of those.
Yeah.
I'll post something to the list as a call for folks interested in being part of an initial process meetings turning into a governance.
And I know there was a straw man that was put together that included things like gated polls, automated smoke tests, something about having stories in Jira, defect track, all these things that are going to make, help turn this into a product. Oh, and the other one that I thought was really significant was release coordination. One of the things that seems like it's been a bane to Crowbar 1 has been different.
Hello, did we just lose someone?
Yeah.
Yep, I think we lost Rob, who was talking.
My connection.
We're really hampered by running our infrastructure, our open source infrastructure behind Dell's firewall. It's just not scalable in terms of access for people. I really feel strongly that unless the organization that is hosting the infrastructure is already has open source in its DNA, it's just going to be roadblock after roadblock after roadblock to be able to expose what we're doing with this project. And so little of it has to do with customers, so little of it has to do with Dell's own deals that really stuff that has to do with Dell's own deals we keep behind Dell's firewall. But 95% of what's going on is information that people in the public want and want to work with. The lifeblood of an open source project is its bug tracking database and its code. The bug tracking database is where the developers communicate, and the code is what they're communicating about. And without that exposed, you just have zombies walking around. So for all the new infrastructure pieces that we put in place, I strongly, and I want to make this a really important part of the process meetings, the processes that we develop, and the governance model, that is, we, as governors, we will discourage or not allow community shared resources to be provided by places that don't make a guarantee of the public availability of the community, of the resources that the community needs to interact.
Judd, let's talk internally about it, because we are representing Dell. We are Dell, so the only resource we can bring to the table, which we got from the company. One way or another, it's paid by Dell. So let's figure out how to do it right before proposing something, so we'll be able to deliver it.
All right. Companies that have a mixed model where they're taking care of private customers and also but primarily working with an open source community, generally rent their services, generally use either Jira hosted externally. That's how it's been successful in the past.
Correct. So that's why, before we propose something, let's iron out internally how we're going to have the funding and support for that before proposing it. Let's not jump the gun and try to promise something which we cannot deliver, which we have notorious record
on. As we were talking here, Rob popped up a note here. Let's start talking about deliverables for next sprint, which would be probably a good idea. Item number 2, discuss items for a backlog, which is recursive. Yeah, we're also being recursive because we're linking to ourselves here for the updates. But actually, we arguably should put the comments we just made into a separate minutes document. But looking at the next sprint, I don't know what the priorities are. I would mention that I added one item down here on the backlog, which is to look into rendering docs using GitHub Flavored Markdown. We've been going in loops trying to deal with the real Markdown standard, please stand up. So after a couple of discussions with Dale and a little frustration on my side, I'm going to look into getting a rendering engine into Crowbar that actually supports GitHub Flavored Markdown, which means that we get consistency between the docs on GitHub and the docs as rendered in the Crowbar UI, which would be nice.
Very nice.
I'm naively assuming that's not going to be a large task, but I don't know yet.
So that's user documentation, but about code documentation, are we looking at using Yard at all?
That specifically, that is the code that goes into the doc directories, which is, user guide, developer's guide. So you can think of it as user documentation, but anything that goes into the doc directory, I haven't in any way, shape, or form looked at Ruby level documentation.
So the problems I'm running into is there's a lot of code and there's zero documentation in the code.
Yeah. Hey, I've actually been starting to follow the guidelines for RubyDoc. When I make changes, I'm putting in comments. I haven't put a lot of documentation in, but I'm putting RubyDoc compatible comments on new functions and things like that, just so we know what they do. But I'm 100% behind code level doc. We currently have no standards or guidelines. I'll pretty much take anything.
Yeah, I don't know a ton about it, but Yard looks pretty good, and Yard seems to generate, Java doc looking kind of stuff, which seems good to me.
All right, so got it. So we need to have agreement on how we're going to generate the docs and which tool set we're going to use for that, and then we'll have to enforce that all the pull requests will have appropriate documentation in the pull request to be accepted. And then we'll set up the guidance for all of the reviewers to follow that.
Okay.
And
where do we want to?
This is Dave Patterson. My 2 cents for what we should prioritize on next sprint is having a way for a developer to sit down, install the code, and figure out how to stand up a bar clamp and have it do work. We don't have that kind of knowledge base yet. And I think that, like Chris and I are kind of stuck. We've gone as far as we can with the Ceph bar clamp as a skeleton, but our stuff's installing, not working, and now we're like, what do we do next? So I think to bring more people on board, that would be the next priority, in my opinion.
Okay, where do we capture that? Is that a topic for our next design meeting? Or is that a topic for the next sprint?
I think it's a topic for next sprint plan. And again, I will let the community decide, but all of the work is going on right now in the current organization, not an OpenCrowbar. And again, if OpenCrowbar is ready for the development to be done on that in terms of tools and everything else, then I'm for it. Until that time, I would say let's have the guidance to be done where Crowbar 2 code base is in the crowbar.org.
Yeah. By the way, Arkady, when you say development work, I assume you mean workload bar clamps, because I'm hoping nobody's touching Crowbar in both places. Okay.
Yes.
And that's good because this work can inform what we decide to do with the OpenCrowbar repo in terms of the best documentation plan. You know, I've gotten so much benefit out of when Ruby code is well documented and it's easy to, like, you know, I've lived in the test code and its documentation for a while, and it's been great.
So where are we going to document on this the specific deliverables for the coming sprint and what the barriers and obstacles are that need to be overcome?
We can do it on this document, and then I can pull it out and say, this is, from the community call, this is what we have coming up for sprint planning.
Yeah.
When is the sprint planning meeting?
Wouldn't we kind of use this doc in planning, just use this doc? And
yeah, I mean, that's
the plan comes out of that.
That's the committed items session in this section in this docs. So.
Yeah, the committed items, as Rob's pointing out. So what you're committing to, stick in committed items. You guys see that in this document? Committed items?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I, for one, will be doing two things. Wrapping up the Docker workload capabilities for Crowbar developers, and to have a development pattern, a dev test cycle that works both in the Crowbar organization and in the OpenCrowbar organization. Because I really want to.
How do we decide what gets in committed items?
You commit. I think we're all in agreement about the documentation stuff.
There's obviously hold on. There's obviously a looping problem with the internal process because we can't commit items that are not in the sprint yet. So this part of the process is strategic, right? We need to figure out how to do that. We actually can probably put things that are potential commits or priorities, and then after we get done planning internally, we can then move the priorities into commits. They're not committed yet. We need to work out a process to it.
Yeah, so maybe we call it priority items, and then priority items will get great. Priority items will turn into commitments after our own sprint planning. And any other groups who would join us, you know, we would meet on these calls and say, these are the things we want to take back to our group to commit to. And hopefully, you know, some of them can be firm commitments during the community call, but others, like for our process, have to go back to balance off of customer needs and internal needs. Very natural process. Did I lose everybody?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. But it would increase the frequency of the feedback loop between organizations and the community, right? Separate organizations and the community. So we'd get together, we'd plan like we are doing now. We go back to our separate organizations, and then the separate organizations report back to, you know, Dell is committed to these items for the sprint internally. what they've been listed as priorities, and they came back as, well, some of them dropped for us. And, we'll get them, somebody can pick it up for next sprint, and we can reshuffle there.
So when we've kind of defined, or we've mud mapped what we're going to do for the coming sprint, what is a deliverable that we have on our horizon, and when do we expect to have a deliverable out?
Are you asking for an example?
I think we have two concrete things which we discussed today, which we wanted to deliver in the upcoming sprint. The first one is what is documentation process for documentation we're gonna use? Which tool set? Is it Yard? Is it RDoc from the Ruby? And set up the process how to do that. I think that's a very concrete thing. We'll have some discussion on the reflector, and then we can finalize that. Tangible. The second one is the one which David mentioned. That is the full documentation of how to create the bar clamp, how to deploy the crowbar with with a new bar clamp, and how to proceed of testing the new bar clamp. David, did I properly capture what you asked? David?
And then it dropped again.
Okay.
As I wrap up the Docker work for the development audience, my priority for this sprint would be to do a live demo of using Vagrant and Docker to get development up and running and show the development process. Hopefully by mid next week, I would be doing that. And then also at the same time, working with Chris and Dave to have a clear expression of what we're going to be doing with Berkshelf and a sample or two of working with Berkshelf to manage upstream cookbooks and to manage local cookbooks.
One more thing, Judd, with respect to the Dockers. The goal for the Dockers work which you were doing is to integrate with the testing framework so we can test the scale out, so we can test a larger number of the nodes, which includes, node. We can't do obviously bias and rate, but we should be able to do the node discovery and putting OS on the node. So let's set up the meeting between yourself and Derek, so we can close the loop on that, because just saying that's available is not going to do much good from deliverable point of view.
I could definitely talk to Derek. And we can sort of blue sky some of the things we'd like to do with Docker, and so we can get a better feeling for its capability. And I can give him a demo of what I've got working, and then we need to plan exactly how the integration would work. But an implementation of that is a big bite, too big a bite for the sprint.
Fair enough.
Be included in that, because I'll be able to do face-to-face with Derek, and that'll help. But some of the things that you're describing, Arkady, don't quite make sense with Docker because of the way it works. So we need to clarify what Docker is useful for from that perspective.
Fair enough. Let's take it offline. That has nothing to do with
Let's take it offline. It's definitely a topic to put in the design topics meeting, and that actually, Judd, might be a good platform to do that discussion next Wednesday.
I think we're kind of wrapping up. I had my last thing was we have to collect agenda for design calls and then review the state of the dev tool. I guess we're not going to get to, it would be foolish to try to review the state of the dev tool now. And if there's any other agenda items folks would want for follow-on design calls, let's hear them in the CD 2014 Etherpad.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, Judd, thank you. This has been a great kickoff. I think
Great.
we
Yeah.
covered a lot of material.
Cool. Yeah. And lots of great stuff to follow up on. I'm looking forward to the next time.
Thank you, Judd.
Hey, thanks.
Hey, stay classy, San Diego.